My name is Susan Doyle from Box Media, and I will be the moderator today. I would like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 13th webinar, the topic of which is the practical application and benefits of an effective full plan session presented by Eddie Quinn and Willie Power from DPS Group. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and we will consolidate and ask Eddie and Willie in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The agenda will be as follows: opening introduction by Richard Fitzpatrick, then the presentation by Eddie Quinn and Willie Power, followed by questions and answers. I will now hand you over to Richard.
Thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us, which is our second webinar in a series of 3, focusing on the last planner and the practical application of some of the tools that form part of that system. We're delighted to have Willie and Eddie from DPS present on that and give some practical applications of where they've been doing it within the organisation. I'll do some quick introductions on Willie and Eddie. Willie has almost 30 years of construction management experience in the Irish and UK sectors, and presently leads the implementation of Last Planner within the DPS engineering organisation, their Cork operations, and is advanced in adoption of lean thinking and lean construction practices. He is the first class honours graduate degree in business in lean practice from Waterford Institute of Technology. Eddie is a senior lean construction facilitator with DPS and has over 20 years experience in global pharmaceutical and semiconductor sectors, and he has an engineering degree from Tala IT and a PMI accreditation through the NCI. So I'll hand over to Willie and Eddie to present on their session.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. William Power is my name, and I'm joined by my colleague Eddie Quinn, and between the two of us we have 10 years practical experience with the Last Planner system. So really we just want to deliver today's presentation from a practitioner's viewpoint. So as Richard introduced, this is the third in the series of webinars on the Last Planner system. So today we're focusing on the pull plan session. So we can see where the pull plan fits into the Last Planner system, in that the previous webinars have introduced Last Planner, and we can see where the milestone on the weekly work plan. So the critical enabler today is the pull plan, and we can see where it fits in there and where it joins the link between the milestone plan and the make ready plan. So that's what we're going to focus on in today's webinar. So I'll hand you over now to Eddie, who's going to introduce what a pull plan is.
Thank you, Willie. Let's first look at the definition of pull planning. Pull planning, in simple terms, is a technique that's used as part of the Last Planner system to develop a coordinated plan for one phase of a project, and it's primarily focused on handovers. What does this mean? Simply put, it's getting the right people together in a room with the objectives of owning the schedule as a team. In the pull plan, we are just concerned with handoffs, which is what needs to be done for me to complete my work. So from this point of view, the key question in a pull plan is, how will we work together to meet the project milestones? The answer to this is by using the Last Planner system. Using the pull plan, we can promote conversations between trade foremen, collaborative planning, one team, one goal, building relationships, predictable workflow. But the key to it, which is highlighted in yellow there, is build habits. So the Last Planners must coach participants to share responsibilities. So when we have a definition of the Last Planner. The Last Planner is the last person to assign work to the journeyman in the field. But we need to draw a distinction between what a Last Planner is and what a Last Planner facilitator is. A Last Planner facilitator is the custodian of the Last Planner process. He's a servant leader whose purpose is to help the group make the best decisions. In this case, he's the trusted member who makes proper decisions based on timing.
Right, so just looking now at the advantages of using a pull plan over the traditional critical path method of construction, what we're bringing in here is change. and we need a reason and a motivation for the change. And I'm sure many of you on using traditional methods would have come across the conflict, the reactive nature. Even construction management becomes a constant firefighting for all the issues that arise day to day. Whereas with using the last planner method, collaboration is introduced. It's a lot more proactive because you're trying to be predictable and planning your workflow. You're looking ahead a week, you're using the 6-week look ahead, you're using constraints to eliminate the blockers that are there to creating the flow of work. So going back to the traditional one, the critical path is constantly pushing work to commence on a particular date. You often hear trades saying, oh, I need to start my work this week, that's why I'm here. But that wouldn't have been coordinated with the other trades. And that's the big difference with Last Planner, is that using the pull plan, we've active coordination. Everybody is buying into the program. So that missing link that exists between the milestone program and the weekly work plan, that now has been bridged by using the pull plan system, with everybody stating where they need to hand off their trade and where they take on from the previous trade. And another big thing with the critical path method, there's no learning from the issues that arise. Whereas with Last Planner, every week we're constantly reflecting on what the issues that impeded our work last week were, what can we do to prevent that happening again. So that really is the major difference between the traditional methods and the Last Planner system. So as we mentioned the word change, and in bringing in change there needs to be a motivation to bring it in. So when you look at construction, there's a lot of work in Ireland at the moment with global clients, global owners, delivering projects in Ireland, and a lot of them, from our experience in the past couple of years, are increasingly using lean construction techniques, and they've gone as far as mandating the use of Last Planner on their project. And the reason is, as you can see there on the screen, and even McKinsey's report earlier this year referred to the fact that only 2% of global capital projects actually achieve their schedule and cost targets. So a reason for this, and when you're standing in the shoes of these global clients, mostly in the manufacturing production sector, you can see that due to the application of lean techniques and processes and operations management, that manufacturing has increased its productivity by over 150% over the last 50 years, whereas construction has stagnated and in fact has regressed in the last 10 years. And if we hone in a little bit more on this, we can see that due to these lean techniques, manufacturing has reduced the waste within the productive time down to 12%, whereas construction, really it's a frightening figure of 57% of non-value add. So that's the motivation, that's the opportunity that exists in construction at the moment. If we bring this across to the Irish context, we can see a graph there showing the last 10 years, the high and the low of productivity output. But if we focus looking forward, say 2017 to 2020, we can see a productivity or an output there of 71 billion that's forecast. So even if we bring across that 57% or whatever percentage it is, we can see there's a major opportunity there to address the non-value add and really to make the Irish construction sector and Ireland in general a better place for foreign direct investment and for global clients to come here. So how do we address this non-value add? Many of you would have seen this slide before, which deals with the 8 wastes, but the very active pull planning and Last Planner deals specifically with the waiting time. And it's the waiting time that's the big issue in construction at the moment. If you were waiting for the next trade to finish, or if another trade is waiting for you to hand over to them, that really is the big waste of productive time. And one of the countermeasures that Last Planner uses and the pull planning system to address this is that 8th waste, the skills of the project members, the knowledge, the combined experience. Within a project team there of trade foremen, you've got 600 or 700 years of experience that you can bring in to sort out the issues and the handoffs. Many of these would have come in from other projects where they would have seen different methodologies used. So it's really important to use all this skill. So that's the main focus of the pull planning session, is to use the skills of the project members and to give them ownership and accountability of the schedule, because when it's prepared by a scheduler at the early stage of a project, it is somebody else's schedule at that stage. So what we're doing is bringing it down to ground level, to the trades, to the foremen, to the contractors, and we can work with that then on a weekly basis with our weekly work plans.
So what is the key enablers for a pull plan? So back to what Willie says, we're acutely aware that there is a culture change needed. Now, how do you affect culture? So if we look at this diagram in front of you here, we see 7 people who's going to be part of our bungalow build example later on. Just looking at them, it's evident that we have different personalities here. We've also got some guys, you know, that all of them have different questions. All of them has a silo effect, and all of them are concerned with just looking at their work and what the loadings for that is. So, for example, if we look at some of the questions that's there, I don't like conflict. I don't know the other members. I don't like change. What is the overall scope? When do I start? Can I make a profit on this project? Will all the prior work be done for me to start? So these are all relevant questions. And if we look at it, it's common for all these guys. These guys will all ask these same questions. So the key for us as Last Planner facilitators is to engage with all the stakeholders here. Make them feel valued, take their opinions, and the common goal statement is how can we do our work together to meet the project milestones. So let's look at one aspect to it. We're looking at the work prior to a pull plan. So obviously, for a pull plan to be successful, certain things need to be done beforehand. So we need to identify the correct stakeholders. What does this mean? We need the correct guys in the room making the decision for their companies and giving us commits from a schedule point of view. Ensure that the room is set up correctly. When we say this, we mean that the room is correctly sized and that all participants feel comfortable and we are ready for the correct setting. Ensure that all attendees confirm to be physically there. So we need everybody to be there. We need to confirm that they're all there. We do this and I'll talk to how we can do that. Ensure the materials are available. So prior to that, we need to send out the scope of work. So whatever materials is available to the team to make preparation and make decisions before they come into the room. Ensure the prep work complete by all parties. So the meeting should be scheduled 2 weeks in advance with a follow-up 3 days prior. You might ask the question, why do we follow up? We need to ensure that everybody is in attendance. And on those invitations, we need to clearly state the objectives of the meetings, the expectations from the stakeholders, define time duration, and, as I said already, the relevant documentation sent out for prior work to be completed. The key enablers for the pull plan during the pull plan. So before we even start, the pull plan does not go ahead unless all stakeholders are physically present. What we mean here is we're starting a journey with all these stakeholders that's going to make commitments to each other. And if some stakeholder is not present, obviously we've fallen at the first hurdle and we need to readjust and go back and ensure that everybody is physically present. During the pull plan, we'll go through introductions, so we'll engage with all stakeholders and we'll make them comfortable. We go through the objectives. We have a constraints log as well posted on the wall. So we have objectives and constraints all posted on the wall. We have activities breakdown list, posted and sticky notes. We've also have in the room at our disposal all the required drawings and documentation. However, the key to the pull plan is roll out the rules of engagement prior to us just starting. So, key rules is focus on the handoffs. Do not get bogged down in detail. What we mean here is we don't, in our bungalow example, we don't want the plasterer to tell us exactly how he's going to, what consistency of plaster he's using. We really only want to focus on handovers at this stage. Want reliable promises and commitments. So we don't want the expression to be used, avoid, I hope to, perhaps. These don't give us a clear commitment. So we keep probing questions. We keep probing questions there to get a definitive commitment. We are a team and only as good as our weakest member. So we need to ensure that everybody's fully engaged. Give ourselves and our team the opportunity to behave as beginners. Don't pretend that you've already done last planner principles. Don't be concerned with understanding right away. We need to practice. Don't be concerned with looking good. Engage and ask questions. So the real motive for having the key stakeholders in the room is that these are subject matter experts in their field, and we just want to put it all together that the handovers are applicable. So here we just see a photograph of an example bungalow, and it's just to give you an appreciation of what we're talking about today. Why are we using a bungalow example? We're using it perhaps in the current climate, which we see we have a housing crisis in this country, and by using pull plan, we hope that we look at reduction in schedules, and obviously with that we can reduce the schedules. Here we have a photograph of a typical pull plan session. So just by looking at this, we can show engagement here. We have the post-its on the wall. We have one trade that's actually assigning his post-its onto the wall. We're not worried about where in location they are at the moment. We've actually people enthusiastically looking as well. It's we also have somebody else preparing their post-its, and we have a sideline meeting here going on as well, which maybe is looking at one section of our pull plan phase. We also have on the walls labelled here the constraints logs and their objectives. So let's see what we can go through. So step one, we'll go through the introduction and the ground rules. We need to define the scope of work. So we'll actually go through the scope of work with the teams, see who's involved, and we have those as reference as well during the pull planning process. We set the key milestone dates on the pull plan, and we assign coloured post-its to all stakeholders. What we're saying here is we have a different colour post-it for all the different stakeholders. So at a glance, looking at the board, we can see exactly where somebody is. And so here's an example of a post-it. So on the post-it, we're looking at here the trade company name. We're looking at the task. So the task here is to clearly identify the task to be completed. So we want a clear identification. Duration is the precise duration to complete the task. So no buffering. We want the exact duration. We need a predecessor. So what task needs to happen before I can start? And the predecessor's trade, who is the owner of this predecessor for me to complete my work? Step two, as a stakeholder, we list activities, and we then transfer our activities onto the post-its. So if I look here again, just an example of the post-it there, and here's one that's already filled out. So we're looking at here, the trade is the carpenter in this instant. The task is install internal stud wall partitions. His duration is 8 days. What is his predecessor is the QA inspection of the weatherproof, of the weather building. And we have the general contractor as a predecessor trade. So we'll just move on to step 3, to the wall. So I'll just identify on the photograph here a couple of things that we're looking at. So for example, we've looked at the start and we've got our finish. But we also have other milestones, which is phase milestones, which is determined by the team in the room. So what we need to be very clear in here is how do we define these milestones. For example, weatherproof of a building sounds very clear, but actually it could be, there's a lot of ambiguity here, so it mightn't be as clear. So we need to really define, what do we mean by weatherproof in a building? Is it that the roof tiles and all are intact? Is it that the building itself is weatherproof, all windows and doors in place? Or is it point of view that it's externally plastered? Who verifies when the milestone is complete? So these are all things that needs to happen in sequence in the pull plan. So the same example here in first fix complete and second fix complete. If we look at the picture here, we can see the different post-its. So we see different trades, so the greens here, the reds. So at a glance, we can look across and see where we are. All we're concerned in this picture here is that we've got the posts between the different milestone phases. So we're looking at here between weatherproofing and first fix and what needs to happen. We don't have them in sequence here at the moment, we just have them put up on the wall. Step 4, we're looking at, and I go through the photograph here once again. So we're looking at the sequence in here. So we're starting at the finish, we're pulling all the way. So what we're at here is we're looking at the last one, the finish milestone. We're saying, what is the last thing that needs to be completed for this project? So on this post would be key in the door for the client. So what needs to happen before this? And that's where we work all the way backwards until we come up with a critical path. And on the first line across, we see our critical path. Now, this section of the pull plan does not happen over 10-minute duration. This could take up to an hour. So everybody is actually standing looking at the wall. So we go through all the sequence here to make sure it's correct. We're also want to make sure that nobody else touches any of the other post-its. So we just go through one post at a time. So if we see here from right to left, we're looking at the critical path here. If we look at in this area here from weatherproofing to first fix, we see any of the work that needs to happen in parallel as well. So here's the predecessor and here's work that happens afterwards. So if we look at here, we have backlog activities as well. So these activities here will need to happen within the duration of the project, maybe from weatherproofing to second fix, but we're not concerned as long as they're within the schedule and those guys are working away without impacting on anybody else. Here's an example here that we can look at here of congestion. So after the first fix here, we're looking at all the trades starting to work. So if we're looking at a typical house build, this is probably where a lot of man hours are being used in the project. We're looking at congestion. We're also looking at sequencing here correctly. For example, if we wanted to reduce the schedule here, we perhaps would look at, for an example here is after the first fix, we're fitting the kitchen. In order to fit the kitchen, one example here would be to prioritize the skimming of the wall within the kitchen, which allows this work to happen. So it's making work ready.
Yeah, so just to clarify there now and run over some of the important steps of what Eddie has ran through. The most important thing in pull planning is that we're using the backward pass, in that we're commencing at the completion date of the phase, working backwards. And in a way, what we're doing here is we're challenging the original high-level schedule, and we're just having a look to see, does the logic work in the right direction with it? If that original phase is 3 months and we end up being 3.5 or 4 months, then we've challenged it and we've identified the areas that need to be addressed. So the work tasks, the information, material deliveries, they're all planned based on the demand or the request or the pull, as it's called, of the DEX customers that are downstream. So then you can bring in operations, management theories here, or lean practices. Pull planning often exposes the need for smaller batches, just-in-time delivery. We saw Eddie referring to congestion. So therefore we need to improve the leveling of the resources, balance the resources, see can we stretch it out a bit and load it over a longer duration. And the ultimate aim is to reduce the lead times. And as referred to earlier, just keep the flow moving, avoid interruptions, avoid waiting time. So the result of that is that the workflow becomes more reliable, more predictable, and more efficient as the waste of the waiting, the redundancy, over-processing are eliminated. And the reason this is eliminated is because we have used the knowledge and the skills of the entire team members.
Okay, so the last step in the pull plan process is to transfer the post-its here onto a software system. So for example, one of our team members is the scheduler. At this point of time, he must be happy because we've identified the critical path, we've identified any work that happened in parallel. So during the meeting, he puts that together. So we will, before the meeting or before the pull plan is completed, we actually have a software version of what we've agreed. After this, we'll actually monitor the progress and task completion through daily huddles and weekly coordination meetings. So that's where all the detail or the granularity happens. And then we adjust the commitment or the tasks as required. So for example, here's the example in Microsoft project of what we're after doing in the bungalow example. One thing I'd point out here is in the meeting, we've gone through it, we've got the correct owners of committing to each other as a team, and we've also at the meeting, at the pull plan, identified all our critical paths. We've also identified constraints which might not have been identified during design. So for example, in our constraints log, somebody might have identified something that has to be moved. And so we can identify a need date, and during the pull plan, we assign an owner for that, so that gets moved or whatever needs to be done to make work happen.
Okay, so just using the example there now of the pull plan, and we often get asked there in our daily or weekly work by contractors or subcontractors, where would I start implementing lean construction? Now, lean itself can come across as being very complex and complicated, and even lean applied to construction mightn't be very simple either. But the very act of pull planning and using last planner system, that's the suggestion we would make to companies, is start at it. Start that last planner system, start with the pull plan. And we just run through some of the principles of lean. We can see value being exhibited there by the trades coming to the wall, declaring what value they demand for them to start the job. And this also leads on to the next customer, which is a concept in construction. You always need to be looking at the next trade. If the block layer is building a wall, he needs to know what the next guy is. If it's a plaster is on, then the wall needs to be a certain specification for the plasterer. So you're always engaging that way with the next customer, you're listening to his voice. All of this collaboration, of course, creates the flow. We've spoken before about the flow. It's important just to keep it all moving, whatever the pace is. Once we can avoid interruptions, avoid the waiting time, or whatever else can come in, the variances that might prevent the work from happening. We've spoken about collaboration. It's about trust. It's about transparency. It's about all the team working together to move forwards on the project. Of course, one of the key tenets of lean would be respect for people. And that might come across as being complicated, what it means. But it's exactly what you've seen there in the pull plan. It's guys coming together, all their experience, their knowledge, their skills. It's all being utilized. They all are being respected for participating within the process. And they end up getting ownership of the schedule and accountability for that as well. It brings us back into the waste removal. We can see that by creating the flow, everybody engaging, we're trying to address that 57% that we saw earlier, and generally give better value to the client or to the owner of the project.
So just to show credibility to the last planner system, I just want to cite 3 examples here. So here's an example of productivity improvement. So this was in BA in the UK. Results show a 30% improvement in the rebuilding time for runways since last planner was introduced, and predictability is greatly improved. Second example we have is schedule improvement. So implementation of pull plans and last planner systems in 2015 allowed a large capital investments company in West Dublin to achieve 100% target on a time project milestone for a consistent period of 30 weeks. And that's verified by Richard Casey TPS. We have a safety improvement as well. Danish research on a like-for-like project comparisons within a single company showed 65% fewer accidents and up to 70% less in sickness absence on last planner managed construction sites. That's from Moss in 2013. So here we can see 3 examples of where it helps productivity, schedule and safety improvements.
Right. So just as an overall summary of what we've gone through there, we can see pull planning, collaboration, commitment, all the participants, and that goes to the very heart of Lean and to the foundational principles. Also, last planner and its components, we see value, next customer awareness, and we must remember that what construction is, it's all about the people. It's about people making commitments, making promises, delivering on that promises. So in effect, what we see pull planning, last planner, and the management of construction being is coordinating and managing how people behave and how they respond to commitments. It becomes a social network, and that's why the very act of pull planning and last planner itself is so critical to lean in construction and efficiency and improvement. So just some suggested articles there that we have referred to in the content of the presentation that you can look at in your own time.
Yeah, so it's our hope that everybody can take away something beneficial from this presentation. With our combined years of experience in using both last planner and traditional methods, we can understand why last planner we cannot understand why last planner would not be used on projects as a system of choice. So from myself and Willie's point of view, we've come through stress, the inconsistencies, and we've seen the difference in when we're using last planner versus traditional. So if you have any further queries, you can contact either myself or Willie on the email addresses attached.
So the next slides there are the trademark of the last planner system. So if anyone is using it, just be aware that it is trademarked, and just to refer to the Lean Construction Institute if you're using last planner in any promotional material or if you're using it in your work. So that concludes our presentation today. For further information, there's some links there on that. So I hand back to you, Richard, on behalf of Eddie and myself, if there are any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Willie and Eddie, for that. I think it can be described as a very useful and informative presentation on the practical application of the full planning system. And I think what was very powerful there was the example you used, which showed a bungalow construction, which is absolutely pertinent given some of the challenges we face within the house building area. And you outlined the benefits of how last planner provides in terms of its implementation on projects. So certainly something that I think all projects and all clients should be adopting and implementing. You know, from a Lean Construction Ireland perspective, we'd endorse and promote the use of last planner. So thank you indeed for your time in putting that together and presenting it to all those online. If I can just say apologies to anybody who may have encountered some technical difficulties at the very start of the webinar. If that's the case, please get apologies on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. We'll look into make sure those don't happen in the future, but hopefully you're able to hear the presentation for the rest of the afternoon. The presentation certainly has generated a number of interesting questions, Willie and Eddie, so I'll pick a couple up here and I'll run through them with you. The principles of collaboration, which the last planner system certainly recommends, can sometimes be sort of problematic given contractual arrangements and how parties might fit within a contract. How would those challenges, do you think, be overcome?
Yeah, that's a major challenge, all right. And I think recent research has shown that in Ireland that the nature of the contracts, which traditionally can be very adversarial and can promote adversarial relationships, can be a challenge. But ultimately, the team needs to come together, and there has to be the project goal in mind. And if you can get that level of engagement from at director level from the start, from all the parties or the stakeholders, you've got the client and you've got the contractors that are involved, they need to get together, and that the common goal is achieving schedule and achieving cost targets on the project. And once you can get that, I think the collaboration will then really cascade downwards onto the guys that are actually doing the job on the site. So really, I think just like any change initiative, you need that senior level support and commitment to enable it to happen. So it shouldn't be a challenge. It may come across as being an obstacle, but I think there's a little bit of negative thinking involved in that. People need to be a bit more open-minded as to the benefits to everybody in the project. Okay, Richard?
I think it's a really interesting point. Everybody's got to buy into it, and it's got to have a top-down approach. I think one of the challenges that we're certainly facing, we're pushing within Lean Construction Ireland, has been able to demonstrate the real value of that. I think that presentation reaffirms the benefits and value of adopting last planner. So thanks for answering that one. Another question came in. You mentioned the use of a software tool. Do you have to have a software tool to implement Last Planner, or can it be done without a software system?
Yeah, let me answer that. I think it can be used without having a software system, as long as everybody's bought in and that everybody has agreed of if it's posted up in the workplace and everybody has an understanding of what has been agreed, and it has been sent out to everybody to agree. Willie, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, once it's visual and everyone can understand it, it's quite easy. Have it up on the wall on a document or in a grid layout, and once people can understand it, can refer back to it. What we use it in our work is that next week's work plan is generated from what we committed to on the pull plan. So it needn't be on an Excel document or on a software document. Obviously it helps, but you can quite simply, on a sheet of A0 paper, make out a grid layout and just put your stickies into that and work on it. You've more ready.
Yeah, and just base it on afterwards, after the pull plan, where it's more applicable is in a weekly work plan. Weekly work plan itself should be posted up in the workplace so that anybody working there, the Last Planners, can clearly identify what they should be doing that day, and it gets used in the daily huddles afterwards as well. So absolutely, it should be paper-based or software-based, but it should be at the coalface that everybody has clear visibility of what their work entails on that day. Okay, Richard?
And I think, yeah, absolutely. No, I think just to add to that, what you're saying is that the software tool isn't the answer. You have to understand the principles and get people collaborating in terms of the pull planning process. And you don't need a software tool necessarily to do that, but you could certainly see the power of having people working in a room with the visualization aspect, with the coloured stickies and having it up on the wall. I mean, that's a very powerful way to get the engagement and interaction with people. So you don't need a tool. It's a case of understanding how Last Plan is implemented and getting the stakeholders together, which is great. There's a question that's come here regarding the typical time required to remove constraints in the planning process, and do you feedback the percentages to the team on a weekly basis in terms of addressing those constraints?
Yeah, certainly you need to provide the feedback with the constraints, and constraints can be a challenging issue because some issues arise. If design is late for a start, then the team needs time to review the design and then to see where that fits into the schedule. Like if you have design arriving only a week before the task is to start, then you're under pressure straight away to get it reviewed, to get all the constraints screened, and to see what other information you need. So ideally you need design and time, and then you need the work, enough adequate time between the design arriving and when the work is to start, that you can check all the flows that are involved. I suppose the lean terminology is the 7 flows, the 7 inputs that you have, that you can screen everything for it. So that is a challenging one, but the earlier you can get design, the better. And as regards removal of the constraints, it obviously depends how much is involved in that, how much information is being looked for. Is it a physical constraint that can be sorted out on site and you can divert workforce or resources onto it, or is it back to a design office to remove that constraint? So it's a bit of a difficult one around that, but you need to action it to somebody that has the authority to remove it and to see how critical it is or what work is it going to hold up. So Eddie might add on to that as well there.
Yeah, with the Last Planners principles, the onus is on everybody to work as a team and obviously to identify constraints as early as possible. The longer we have, so if we have 6 weeks to remove a constraint or work on it, obviously that's more beneficial than 2 weeks in. So what we've seen in traditional methods is a constraint identified on the day off or a day before, which we did not have adequate turnaround time. By using the Last Planner, we hope to send out a 6-week look ahead, which allows us to identify those constraints and then review them on a week-to-week basis, going until the actual work. So the key to it is identifying the constraints early and removing them as soon as possible. Is that okay, Richard?
Okay, no, absolutely. I think what's coming through what you're saying is the need to manage the plan and to get everybody working in a collaborative way to manage those constraints and the issues going to affect delivery and flow of information. So, no, you've answered indeed. There's quite a few questions coming through, and I'll try and group a couple of them together. One's asked around the role of who carries out the role of the last planner facilitator on a project. And if someone wanted to become a last planner facilitator, what level of coaching, how much time would it take to get someone into the space where they could become a last planner facilitator? So there's who is the facilitator of the project, and how would somebody get trained in terms of what's required and the time frame with that?
Yeah, well, the last planner system in itself and using the tools of it is different to the understanding. So what I would think from my own experience is that you really need an understanding of what the problems and what the challenges in construction are. So I think you'd need some sort of foundational education or experience in the principles of Lean and how that can be applied to construction. Because if it's difficult enough if you come from within the construction environment, a lot of these problems are accepted as being a normal part of construction. Whereas I think you need to be in the mindset that you need to challenge these problems, that it's not okay for a trade not turning up on a Monday when they have committed to, and this is going to impact other work or other trades on the site. So for a start, I think you really need to research. Now you have links there on the webinar, there's quite a depth of research or academic articles and case studies available for people to read into. But the first change is around the mindset of it. And then obviously you need to start implementing it. Just get it into a project, as it said there in the presentation. You can fumble along with it. You can learn as you go. Once you can get a few people around with you that are tuned into the objectives that you want to get across, that all helps. And you can develop that over weeks and months. And really it's just about making yourself better. It's the outline, the guidelines of the last planner system are there to direct you. And you know, you can work it yourself around that. Eddie, you might like to add to that.
However, the key to it, Richard, which we found is last planner facilitator is a full-time position within the team. So I don't think it can be used as on a part-time basis. The last planners themselves is actually people that's doing the work. Is that okay, Richard?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, you mentioned that role of the last planner facilitator is nearly full time, but I suppose that depends on the size and scale of the project and the level. I suppose the different work streams involved. But what you're saying is you do need to be properly trained. But my sort of sense is that people came together in a collaborative way to try and do the full plan. They would sort of learn an element of where the constraints are and where the issues are. So it is about collaboration, isn't it? About trying to get together, but really having the right facilitator to get the best out of those people and the time commitment to a last planner training session. So I think there's more information on our Lean Construction website on that. And I think that's one that's coming through, Willie and Eddie, around training be given for full planning sessions and for last planner. So that's something we can look at from a Lean Construction Ireland perspective in terms of making information available for people. A number of our listeners, if I use that term, have come in and have highlighted the importance of the last planner being, I suppose, supported by and driven by both the client and project owner and stakeholders, because that has to come right through the supply chain as well. So it comes back to your point about top-down support around the implementation and the benefits that last planner will give. So another question, I'm just conscious of time, but we push on. Has the last planner been used successfully on a rail project in Ireland or the UK? Have you come across that, guys?
Well, straight off, I haven't come across it, but there is no reason that it can't be used. Any form of production that needs an input of resources or persons of material, any form of production is conducive to last planner being used. Because what you're doing really is you're screening the tasks that are there, that they have the resources, the equipment, the design information, all the necessary inputs, safe space to work in, and that the prerequisite work is done, and all external issues like permits and licenses and legislative compliance. Any form of production that needs to be planned or coordinated, last planner is suitable. It's been used in shipbuilding. There are case studies on that. I personally haven't seen one on rail, but I see no issue whatsoever why it couldn't be used in it.
Yeah, I think. Any project that has a schedule and there's handoffs to be completed between people, last planner could become very effective.
Okay, I've just seen a comment has come in from one of our listeners who has said that last planner has been used on rail projects in Finland and in the UK. So thank you for sending that in, whoever responded to that. Just another question that probably links with the one about the contracts. Have you seen a situation where the full plan becomes a stick to beat the team with, rather than an incentive to motivate them along? And if so, how do we fix that? So beating people.
No, I certainly don't think so. That really goes against the objectives of the whole collaborative approach, in that the pull plan, as we have seen, is generated by the whole team making commitments based on the information that's available to them. Obviously, they're making commitments and promises. If somebody reneges on a promise or something like that, then look, a project manager is going to go looking for the reasons. But generally, you'd expect that everybody's approach it in the correct manner and with the correct mindset on it. And I'd be surprised if it is used as a stick, but really when you get this level of trust built up within a project team, you'll be surprised that, especially with last planner, you highlight these issues early. If there's bad news coming down the tracks, pardon the pun, you know, it's highlighted, you can generate a workaround. Maybe Eddie, you might like to add to that.
Yeah, and let's look at the flip side of that statement. So sometimes delays can be caused by the client. So last planner itself is a way of tracking this, and obviously, so that's how I would look at it. Okay, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were saying this about adopting the right behaviours on the project team in a collaborative way to really get the project moving forward, because it is, you know, people can and organisations can hide behind contracts, which becomes problematic. But the whole idea with the last panel is to part those, work collaboratively and plan the work so that it becomes a means for the successful delivery of a project, which everybody heads out to do when they turn up from work in the morning. A lot more questions coming through, so we'll quickly go through it because I'm conscious of time. One here is, what is the frequency of the full planning session after you've held the first one to get the milestones? Is it a weekly get-together, and for how long?
Yeah, well, what we're dealing with there with the pull planning session is a phase of the project. So you're picking milestones out of the project. I've seen pull plans done for a 6-month phase, or you might decide to do it for a 3-month phase. If you had a pretty congested or tricky phase coming up, say, after Christmas up until the first 3 months of the year, well, certainly now you'll be focusing in on them 3 months. You'll be trying to get everybody involved in that pull plan. Really what you're trying to do is generate as many constraints or as many potential obstacles or blockers that you can find, and then start working on them to reduce these, to eliminate these, just to allow the work to flow. So really it's dictated. You might do one session on a 6-month job, or a more complicated job, you might decide to do them every 2 months, every 3 months. But it's a good exercise to do. Even if you could afford the time to conduct it once a month, it's an excellent exercise just to generate more insight into what the challenges may be. Okay, Richard?
Oh, okay, yeah, and I think one of our listeners who was listening to that had suggested that Glenn Ballard has recommended that each phase should be no more than 3 months from planning, doing the full planning session and implementing last planner. So you know, no more than 3 months is what's being suggested. But as you say, it depends on the project, if there's complexities or critical mass and milestones and deadlines, and things do shift and change. So it has to meet the project requirement, but no more than 3 months is what's suggested here. Another one's come in, which I think is an interesting one. Do the contracts for the Tier 1 contractors and down the supply chain identify the requirement for full planning? And I suppose that's looking at lean in contracts, and if I answer that one from a Lean Construction Ireland perspective, what we are looking at is an initiative of how we can introduce lean into contracts, both within the private sector and public sector, and that's one of our themes and breakthroughs for the coming year. So what I would suggest is keep your eyes open, look at our website, and as we start to develop and push that one forward, you'll get a sense on where that's going. But I would certainly suggest that client organisations should be looking to try and introduce somewhere within their contracts the requirement for lean construction, lean thinking, and lean practices. What that would look like will depend on the client and the organisation type of project, but I think the answer will be yes, you should be looking at that. And that's where we want to try and push the initiative over the next 12 and 24 months from the Lean Construction Ireland perspective. Another one here, overuse of where we're getting to individual collaborative challenge for me. Bringing everybody together is a challenge, we're saying. Is there a strong soft skills required from the last planner facilitator? So you're bringing lots of different people with different pressures and different challenges together. What's the best, what skills do you need to do that?
Yeah, certainly I think you need a particular set of skills or behaviours just to be able to accommodate everybody, and especially to make people feel comfortable at the start, because there is going to be a fear factor. You're bringing trades into the room straight away that think they're being put on the back foot by a contractor or a facilitator, so it can be an intimidating atmosphere or a place to be. So really the main thing is to put people at ease and ultimately to get the message across to them that you're trying to make their job easier, and that you're trying to plan the job through with them. And I've seen this in my experience, is that really the trade contractors, they totally buy into what you're trying to do, because at the end of it all, you're trying to make their job easier. You're trying to facilitate the flow of work for them, you're trying to identify their problems, and you're allocating actions to people to respond and to relieve their problems before they become major issues outside in the field. So definitely what I'd say at first instance, you know, they need to know what it's about. They can be fearful of it, but I think you need to put them at ease. And there's a separate skill set needed for that facilitator, but really convincing them that you're there to help them and to assist them in their job. I think that's the major point to get across. Okay, Richard?
Okay, thank you for that. The questions still coming in thick and fast, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to have to wrap it up there. But there's a number of themes coming through from the questions that have been asked. One around the need for developing the skills and last planner facilitation, and you just touched on that there. Also, looking at how do we get the collaboration together, how frequently should be using last planner. But the theme is certainly it does provide benefits when implemented right on projects. So I think certainly what you presented today reaffirms that. So I take the opportunity to thank you both for putting together the presentation and presenting it on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. Just to bring things to a conclusion, our next webinar is scheduled for the 13th of January, and that'll be the last in our series of 3 webinars focusing on last planner. Topic for that, it will be the daily huddle, whiteboard huddle. And we'll get the details that will be issued in due course and confirmed on our website. What I'd like to do is, certainly as part of our continuous improvement initiative with Lean Construction Ireland, is any feedback people have on our webinars in terms of topics or format or anything we can help improve these, we would certainly welcome that. You can email them through to leanconstructionireland@gmail.com or email address, and you'll see in the other forms of communication there for us online. So I'd just like to thank Box Media, our media and communications partner, for organising and facilitating this webinar, and to Willie and Eddie for pulling it together and presenting what I think is a very practical and sort of one I think generated a lot of interest given the questions, for pulling that together and doing the presentation for us. So on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland, thank everybody for joining us today, to Box Media, to Willie and Eddie, and I wish everybody a happy Christmas, and hopefully see you and tune in to a new webinar in the new year. Thank you, everybody.